This is the first time I've actually, despite running the church for X amount of time, where X is 10 years, I usually avoid giving talks and lectures. So unfortunately this time I couldn't avoid it because I have a very stubborn and insistent board of directors that said, you should do this one. And of course the first thing I thought is, how can I cut your pay? And I thought, well, I don't pay anybody anything. Okay, before we begin, it's customary, at least in respect when I do things, to open with an invocation. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, the Word, and the thought. Amen. Divine Beloved, grant that this presentation may serve for all of us a mirror to better see ourselves and the sacred flame. That through looking at the life of your church, the saints which inspire it, and the tradition which sustains it, we may be more closely knit to the divine, to each other, and to ourselves. Amen. People seem to, for whatever reason, want to know more about the guy doing the thing, and that would be me, so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to the Apostolic Johannite Church. In or around the year 1999, I had found myself kind of adrift on the sea of spirituality and religion. Previously, I had spent significant time engaging, less than constructively, better living through chemistry, as we call it. That's what we'll call it. And after which, I found myself with new priorities. Typically, at least in movies and TV shows, when people make a sharp turn around, especially after a bad time, people are known to say, well, I found Jesus or had a conversion experience. On my end, however, I had no such experience. It wasn't a case of finding something that I didn't have, but a case of discovering what was already there. The experience, of course, has a name. I call it gnosis, and so do most of us. I'd already counted myself a Christian, though I used different language for it as I went along. Starting off, of course, in the church of my fathers, so to speak, rather of my grandfather, being in the Dutch Reformed tradition, Calvinist. And then later on, I kind of, progressed, if you want to call it a progression, into Anglo-Catholicism with all the conservative joy that it came with. But the idea of the Christos and the Logos being at the center of things wasn't new to me. The only thing that was new, however, was the life-changing reality of the actual experience. Before, of course, it was an intellectual exercise. I went to catechism classes, read history books. But this was where it began to leap off the page. At that point in time, I had already had a couple years of esoteric practice and exploration and dabbling in spiritual traditions under my belt. As anyone who practices those paths know, they tend to generate insight and understanding all their own. In my case, I spiritually burnt my hands a little bit. It's easy to treat the esoteric path as another gadget in a spiritual tool belt, detached and at arm's length and kind of ready to go when you need it. However, as you will come to understand in a direct way, and I hope you're all joining us tomorrow for the workshops that follow this one, they need to be integrated more and become a way of life. So at the ripe old age at which I found myself, my tool belt was packed with all sorts of interesting bits. I had given respectable time to different systems and approaches, at least as much as somebody in their late teens and early 20s could do. And I have to say, I made a pretty good student. Pretty good, a little bit of here, a little bit of there. I had just enough tools and tricks and bits to know that really I hadn't traveled that far, and I had a long distance yet to go. I had a mind for Kabbalistic correspondences, for things like the Norse tradition, for runes, and I could write it pretty well actually. But in all these things and looking at all these things and in dabbling and wandering and looking under many different stones, the idea of esotericism, of course, is to effect change in accordance with the will. But I hadn't really mastered the whole change yourself bit with it. It seemed that I had moved into another intellectual exercise where, well, this is nice to look at. Instead of going from something neat to look at behind an altar, it was something neat to look at that I could hold myself, but really not that much different. Esotericism didn't really change the way I looked at life. Life ended up doing that for itself. And when I was done, the way esoteric practice looked also changed. The life events that I had and the forcible reflection that they engendered, kind of like getting hit over the head, reshaped every side of that coin, because there really is no difference between the esoteric and the exoteric. It had given me a new spiritual impulse in the same way that, Jesus gave Lazarus a new spiritual impulse by saying, "Get the hell up." I was fortunate to survive those events, but greater than my sense of how the hell did I make it out of that alive and relatively sane was a sense of gratitude and awareness of just how many people there are out there navigating life with little in the way of people or landmarks to help guide them. So I came out of it resolved to be the person I never had during that time period. Not smart enough to be a doctor or steady enough, if any of you guys were paying close attention this morning. You really wouldn't want me as your surgeon, trust me. And not patient enough to be a school teacher, though most of the teachers I know are kind of impatient, but they're great people, sorry. I considered the priesthood because I felt I could listen, and help share the load. Monsignor Jordan Stratford has a great analogy for priesthood as being a Sherpa, a mountain guide, that ultimately the path you walk is your own and you do have to walk it. However, there can be people who help show you different paths you can take and, of course, carry some of the load. I thought, okay, I can do that. And at that point, I knew then, just as I imagine many of you know now, that I was a Gnostic, not a world-hating, baby-eating, eschaton-stoking, let me out of this body, but type of guy, but someone with spiritual clarity could distinguish between systems and sources and see the divine in themselves and in the eyes of their fellow human beings. Of course, this kind of vision only takes you so far in life. The world is full of people who become their own visionaries, revelators, and what have you. So now that you've had some nice experiences, what are you going to do with and about it? Like my mention of knowing enough to realize the things that you don't know or the distance you haven't covered, these experiences, this context that I felt called to do needed its own venue or place. It didn't just need it, I needed it. I needed a place to go. In Buddhism, the triple jewel consists of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It isn't a case of Buddha, Dharma, and if we've got some time and if you're not busy, maybe you would like to be the Sangha. It's the third leg. Community is the third leg of a very important stool, without which stuff just falls over. Wherever two or more are gathered, there I am also, says the Logos. And as we heard this morning, you really don't get the there I am also with 0 or 1, though I know some folks like Bray who do crazy things with computers. I found the context I was looking for in the AJC. But before I found that, I found a renewal of my esoteric practice through an esoteric order. Searching through the quagmire that is the internet, I found writings by my predecessor looking for folks to get involved in a thing called the Friary. It was Christian and Gnostic in character, and while I was actually looking for a Gnostic church, I found the outline of what this random guy on the internet was proposing to be right in line with the experiences I had had. So I decided to, drop him a line, write a complete stranger, and say, hey, can you help me out? Interest turned to enthusiasm, and it wasn't long before I had the opportunity to sit down and talk directly with him. I was pretty insistent, you got some phone time? Can we talk? And I think he probably just picked up the phone to get me out of the way. And we kind of go from there. I discovered that he was a Gnostic bishop, and he did this crazy thing called a Gnostic church. And not only was he a Gnostic bishop, but he also, pursued that path through the context of something he called the Apostolic Johannite Church. I think if he was ever disappointed that a large part of my fervor found itself redirected to the AJC as opposed to what I originally signed up for, he never said so. And it was from there I entered into a reading for orders program, which can be best thought of as a kind of apprenticeship program for the priesthood. Now that I've told you a little bit about my wacky journey, and I've left out all the swear words, bottles of booze, chain smoking, and bad movies, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Johannite tradition itself. First of all, important disclaimer, and this is why usually I bow out or, kind of duck behind Dr. Bean every time there's a lecture or thing to be done. I'm not a scholar, an academic, or a historian, or an archaeologist, or anything like that. I'm a priest, and so everything I'm going to present here, my perspective, some of my studies, some of my notes, I do it from the perspective of pastoral value, something you can take home, something you can think about. I'm sure there's going to be a few things where my readings or my understandings may not be up to date or perfect. There's only so many books and documentaries I can watch and cram in, on the plane before coming here. So that being said, there are a great many things that are likely my conjecture and my speculation, which are in turn based on conjecture and speculation.
You're a bit soft in the back. Your voice is a bit soft from the back.
Okay.
Can you speak up a bit?
I will go louder.
Thank you very much.
And I feel bad for the people in the front row.
Paul can take it.
Right. My point is, within the limits of my historical knowledge and with the tools of my own spiritual experience, as well as having the benefit of the experience of folks here and beyond, the point here is to paint a plausible picture of the early community of John and its views and its struggles, and trace that stream of knowledge and practice through the centuries to the present day, and how it informs and shapes and is in turn informed and shaped by the Johannite community here. Initiated by the Baptist, transmitted by the Apostle, and restored in the modern era, the Apostolic Johannite Church enacts the Johannite tradition through an esoteric, Gnostic, and Christian path of spiritual understanding and self-discovery. Ignited in community, nurtured by individual practice and fed by service, the sacred flame of Gnosis embodied in the tradition of the Holy Saints John lives anew through the work of the AJC. How's that for an elevator? Okay. That's the nutshell summary of what we do. But between those bits is some juicy goodness, some schism, some quarrel, some vision, and some resolution. And I think one of the reasons why the story of the community of the beloved disciple resonates so deeply with myself and with others is, not because it's, grand or filmed by James Cameron or any kind of things like that, because it's very human. These are the types of arguments and mistakes that we can make, and we probably do make, and we probably will make. I'm sure it'll all be Tim's fault. The large portion of the material I'm going into comes from the Joannine hypothesis, which is by Father Raymond Brown, who wrote a book called The Community of the Beloved Disciple. Now passed on, he was pretty much considered the foremost Roman Catholic expert on Johannine readings and scholarship. So much so that every subsequent book since his time references and quotes and points back to his work. Despite some of it being 20, 30, 40 years old, including what I'm going to share with you, that it still has a significant impact. And a lot of the theories and views and conclusions he came to are still shared by scholars in the present day. I was introduced to this work by my predecessor, who kind of stumbled on it by accident. I think he liked the title, but I mean, it is my predecessor, so he could have liked the pictures. I'm not too sure. But he introduced this to me, and I think the surprising thing for both of us is because we had already been serving and working in the AJC, presenting based on our own experience, a vision of what a Johannite community would look like. And it's kind of a weird thing to turn around and read scholarship at the time that looks like what you're doing, trapped in amber, to see so many ideas of things that you're already doing reflected in scholarship without knowing otherwise. This is something we didn't know because, sadly we were behind the times. So now, let's go on. I'm going to split this up in 4 parts. I've already gone over the first. Everything you ever wanted to know about the Patriarch, but were too sober to ask. And then part 1, we're going to cover the Johannite community itself. Part 2, we're going to see, this AJC thing, this thing we've all gathered here for this weekend, how does that line up with the early community? Part 3 is to look a little bit at the beloved disciple as a kind of spiritual model. What kind of qualities did this ideal disciple have? In other words, how far do I have yet to go? And finally, we have a question and answer session, if you have questions, where I dump most of the work on Mar Thomas. Now that you've got that. 4 stages. There are 4 stages. The first covers community origins, and this happens from about 40 AD to about 80 AD. Of course, none of these things are perfect or exact. This is all hypothesis. Any questions, by the way, so far? No? Okay. Stage 2 is about the time of the writing of the gospel. And of course, that's about 90 AD. And most scholars that I'm aware of, pretty much, they agree on that. Stage 3 is the epistles, which is a series of letters written by members of the community to other members of the community as a kind of, oh, by the way. And stage 4 is where everything falls apart. Now, and of course this is tricky because we're working from the gospel, but it's generally the opinion of most scholars that I've encountered that far simply from being a spiritual narrative or a kind of historical narrative of the person we would call Jesus, that the Gospel of John actually, between its lines, tells the story and development of the community of John. That you can kind of read into it, that the particular things that are highlighted and talked about are put in there for the specific purpose of reflecting, or as a byproduct, reflect what actually happened to the group of people who composed it. The earliest adherents of the Johannite community, of course, are regular Jews. Regular observant Jews, and they worship in the synagogue. They're not different from their parent tradition, except for one thing, of course, that they view Jesus as being different, as most Christians would do at that time. They viewed him as being the Messiah in a very material sense of expectation, the anointed, the king, a leader, and they felt that Jesus met expectations for what the Jewish Messiah would be. It is very likely that they were former disciples of John the Baptist. Unfortunately, history and writings are silent as to whether or not all the adherents of John the Baptist were comfortable with the new movement as it would develop. One of the reasons why this is dated from where it is, and you'll notice I put a different date actually because I came across 2 dates. One said 40 to 80 AD, one said 50 to 80 AD. I ended up settling on the most conservative number, but forgot to include that in my previous slide. Because of the accuracy of place names referred to in the gospel, it is very likely that some of it was composed before the destruction of the temple, before the Jewish revolt in 66 AD. So here we have now, just like the rest of the developing Christian community, we have folks who feel that Jesus is the Messiah. Somebody they want to follow, but he is a man. He is a leader.